All right, let's come back to our review. And then in this part, we're going to cover valuation. And then valuation in finance is based on time value of money. Everything in finance is pretty much based on time value of money. Right? And then first method we're going to introduce is the discounted cash flow method. Right? When they are valuing a corporation, we need to use the future cash flows, discount them, then add them up to get the present value of future cash flows. And that value should be the value of this corporation. Okay, and make sure to draw a timeline when you perform discounted cash flows. Okay, so in any of the projects, you're gonna have a series of cash flow happens at different points in time. Cash flow 1, 2, 3, 4 are considered future cash flow, and cash flow 0 is your initial cash flow. Based on time value of money, all those cash flows carry some risk, and some risk carries a discount rate, right? So today's money is more valuable than tomorrow's of the same amount. So when you're valuing tomorrow's money at today's amount, you're gonna have to reduce tomorrow's cash by a measure of discount rate. How do you do that? Okay, let's discount each of the cash flow to present using this formula on the right. Present value of a time t cash flow is equal to time t cash flow divided by 1 plus the interest rate, which serves as the discount rate here, and raises to the number of periods between today and the time of the cash flow. Okay, so we do this for each of the cash flow and find out the present value of each of the cash flow as of today. And then we add them up to get the present value of all future cash flows. Okay. All right. So this is essentially what you do with a discounted cash flow method. And nicely, our cash flows can come in very different patterns. And some of the patterns can have an easier way to compute. Okay, same formula, and the simplest case is a deposit. We're depositing something today, and we're expecting one future cash flow when we withdraw our money deposited. Okay, so one future cash flow, simply you just discount that cash flow by the discount rate over the number of periods between today and tomorrow, and the next cash flow. Time of the cash flow. Next, also very simple, called annuity. These are constant cash flows, happens at regular interval for a finite time. Okay, and then next, perpetuity are also constant cash flows that are going on forever. Okay, and there's a variation of perpetuity called growing perpetuity. And those are cash flows, but they're not constant. And cash flows that are growing at a constant rate. Forever. So eventually it's going to blow up, but it's a nice assumption that we're going to use since we have inflation and we have generally just the money is depreciating. So consider your salary, consider the cost of goods and services. They all seem to be growing at a constant rate of inflation. Okay, so this serves as a nice pattern for a lot of the cash flows. And the next one, it's a very common type of cash flow patterns. It's called amortized loan. Okay, they're constant cash flows for a finite time. think of an example of amortized loan. There's mortgages, auto loans, and then, when you buy something large, expensive, such as a laptop or even your phone, you can have payment plans. You can pay at a constant amount of cash, make constant payments for 36 months, right? That's an example of amortized loan. And then next, amortized loans are same as annuities, right? Constant cash flow for finite time. And the next one, bond. Bond is just constant coupon payments for finite time and an extra end of period payment. Okay, so we usually treat bond as two cash flow patterns combined. The first one is an annuity for all the constant coupons, and the second one is a future cash flow, one-time cash flow, such as just like a deposit. Okay, and two cash flow combined. The next one is stocks. The cash flows involved with stocks are typically dividends and usually non-constant, sometimes growing. So and it's going on forever, considering the firms might have ongoing concern till infinity. Okay, so stocks are usually what can be treated as growing perpetuity cash flows, growing at constant rate forever. And next, the investment projects. Those are uneven cash flows during the lifetime of the project. Sometimes it can even be negative. And then you should make sure to consider the initial investment when you're valuing an investment project. Okay. And last one, corporation. They use free cash flows that would come in the future until infinity. And they're typically uneven. And we have to estimate it for a certain period of time. And after that, we'll assume that the cash flow will grow at a constant rate. So, multiple period in a valuation of a corporation. We'll cover those, some of the cash flow patterns in more details in the future slides. Okay, next one, we need to find out the discount rates, right? Once we have cash flows, we find the discount rates. Well, discount rates can come in under various names in various situations. For annuities, deposits, and loans, it's typically called an interest rate. We use an I to denote discount rates in this category. And next, for bond and sort of debt, we use market interest rate to cover the cost of debt, and it's noted as rate of debt. For stocks, we call it required rate of return, and it's denoted as R of S, cost of equity. Okay, and for cost of capital of the whole firm, we cost of capital that's appropriate for investment projects, we use WACC. It's a weighted average of cost of capital. Okay, and in essence, all of the above are required rate of return, right? We will be finding the rates based on the riskiness of the future cash flows. And for example, with required rate of return of stock, we use CAPM. We can't use CAPM to find the required rate of return. Okay, and CAPM, remember it, one important component of CAPM is beta, which is the market risk of the stock. Okay, so that's rate of return. And the next one, with yield maturity, internal rate of return, and they're called expected rate of return. They're estimated based on the initial price and future cash flows. Okay, so they're based on only on cash flows, the initial and future ones, and we can find the expected rate of return. We need to know how to distinguish these two types of rates. It's gonna help you a lot in your understanding of finance. So let me summarize the difference again. For required rate of return, it's found based on the riskiness of future cash flows. And the required rate of return is very useful when we try to determine the price from future cash flows. Okay, and then the expected rate of return, in here we're gonna need the price and future cash flows for us to compute the expected rate return. Okay, this is return that's generated internally from all the cash flows. All right, so this is a market measure based on the market, right? The price is what we can find in the market, and expected return captures the investor's expectation on this asset. Okay, so very different concepts. And the next one, how can we compute these discounted cash flows? And here are a couple patterns of cash flows that you can follow. So let's start with finite number of periods. And if the cash flows are constant, we can use the financial calculator. We use the time value of money function. And then there are 5 variables: the number of periods, the interest rate per period, the payment, it can be coupons or it can be dividends, and then the present value and the future value. So when you're performing discounted cash flow, typically we have all the 4 other information, and all we need is to find the present value. So what we need to do is input the other 4 to obtain the present value. Okay, and well, in the case of uneven cash flows, you can also use a financial calculator. And there's the cash flow function. Okay. You can input the cash flows 0, 1, 2, and the discount rate that used in this calculation, and then you can find the present value. Okay, calculate present value. Right, so financial calculator is very important, and then you're required to have a financial calculator. And the recommended calculator that we usually promote in finance courses is the TI, Texas Instrument TI 83. I think that was it. And 2, and then it's pretty commonly used, and it's one of the required or I would say qualified calculator for the CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst exams. Okay, so in this profession, you sometimes you'll be considering for a CFA exam, and then if you have purchased this calculator today, you won't have to make an additional investment in the future. I have purchased mine like 9 years ago, and I'm still using it. Okay, it's gonna be a good investment, valuable investment for you. Next, we have infinite number of periods. Okay, if it's constant, it's considered a perpetuity, and it's very easy to calculate the present value of this perpetuity. P is equal to the constant payment divided by discount rate. Simple, right? And constant growth rate of cash flows, such as stocks, we're considering the dividends are growing at a constant rate. Okay, so to find the value of the stock, we set it equal to the next period dividend. Since now the payments are not constant, which dividend you use is very important. And for a price or present value of stock as of today of time 0, we're gonna need a dividend from time 1. Okay, and divide by the required rate of return of stock, we also call it cost of equity, minus growth rate of the cash flows. This is the formula you can use for a constant growth rate perpetuity. Okay. And next, a more complicated patterns of cash flow. Non-constant growth cash flows. So it's also used for stocks or firm valuation. And we typically can, forecast for a couple years in the future. And those cash flows, we forecasted at 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 is a actual number. And it can be an uneven number, doesn't follow any patterns. And then afterwards, we typically assume a constant growth rate for anything beyond year 4. So cash flow 5 will be cash flow 4 times 1 plus a growth rate. Okay, so for anything beyond time, any cash flow beyond time 5, we can find a horizon value equal to V of, horizon. That is equal to the cash flow at 5 divided by the required rate of return of the stock minus that constant growth rate. So this cash flow starting from 5, when it's valued at time 4. Make sure always subtract 1 when you're considering, when you're valuing a constant growth model. Okay, so the value of 4, this horizon value will be added to cash flow at 4 to form a new cash flow. And now this is a simpler case of just an uneven cash flow. What do? We follow the most principal or most fundamental formula of excuse me, discounted cash flows. Present value is equal to the sum of all cash flows discounted. 1 plus RS, or 1 plus RS, is 2, plus 1 RS, is 3, plus the combined cash flow at 4 and horizon value, divided 1 plus R S raised to 4. Okay, so these 4 entries summed will be the present value of the non-constant growth pattern of cash flows. Okay, so now we have covered all we need to know about discounted cash flow with different patterns of cash flows. Next, we're gonna start with our capital budgeting sections. And then the first thing we need to know is we need to find the cost of capital for capital budgeting purposes when we're evaluating corporate investment projects. The cost of capital we usually use is called WACC. It's weighted average cost of capital. And it's set equal to 3 components. First comes from debt. Okay, we have the cost of debt, and make sure it's after tax because we have the tax saving of interest. So it's after tax cost of debt and then multiply by the weight of debt. How do you compute the weight of debt? Well, it's amount of debt divided by total asset. Okay, and it's typically combined amount of debt, amount of preferred stocks, plus amount of common stocks. This is the weight of debt. Excuse me. And the next component comes from preferred stocks. It's RP. Okay, the rate of preferred stocks multiplied by weight of preferred stocks. Okay, so how do you find weight of preferred stocks? Weight of amount of preferred stocks divided by the total amount of assets. That's debt, preferred stocks, and common stock combined. The last component comes from common stocks. The rate here is the cost of equity. You can get it from CAPM. And the weight here is, of course, the weight of common stock in assets. And it usually serves as the target capital structure weights. Okay, and cost of debt comes from interest rates, right? And make sure to deduct tax since interest payment is tax deductible. And cost of common equity can be found the equivalent by finding required return. And the required return comes from retained earnings. When firms retain earnings, the firms will be growing. And there's 3 ways to find out the required return for equity. First, you can get it from CAPM, right? Using the CAPM formula, you will need information on the market risk premium and the information of the beta, which is market risk of this stock. Okay, and the second way, you can use discounted cash flow by the constant growth model. And then you can get discount rate dividends that are growing over time. Well, the two growing over time at a rate of G. And sometimes you need to find the growth rate. Remember, you get ROE, return on equity, and multiplied by the retention ratio, which is B. Okay, B serves as a retention ratio that says what's proportion of return, what proportion of earnings that you return in the form of retained earnings. Okay, so G can be found this way, and then the rest of it is just apply the formula. The present value of the stock is the 1 RFI subtract G. Okay, and the last one is using bond yield plus a risk premium. Remember when we said stock and bond, the return of stock is usually higher than the return of the bond because stock comes with higher risk. And if you're given the risk premium and bond yield, you can simply find the return of stock by adding the cost of debt and the risk premium. Okay, all right. So that's how you can find the return of required return of common equity. And if in case of a new stock issuance, you need to consider flotation costs as well. And flotation costs increase the cost of equity. Okay. And next, we're gonna perform capital budgeting with a couple methods. Let's introduce the methods. First, NPV, net present value. For this, we need to use a discount rate, which is WACC, and we need to know the initial cash flow. So what you're essentially doing is discounting all the future cash flows and then subtract the initial investment. Okay, and the rate you're discounting at is WACC. Next, internal rate of return. You know what, before that, so how do you know if your project is worthwhile to be invested in? Yeah, well, the criteria is that the net present value needs to be greater than 0. Okay. And the next one is the IRR criteria. Well, the IRR, as we explained, is called internal rate of return, and it's found based on all cash flows and only cash flows, and it's called the expected rate of return. So we set the cash flows and make the NPV net equal to 0, and we're gonna find the internal rate of return. And now the criteria is that, you know, there is a hurdle rate, typically WACC. It's called hurdle rate. It can be different from WACC. Okay, and then your IRR has to be higher than that predetermined hurdle rate for you to improve firm value by investing in this project. Okay, and there's the regular discounted payback period. Simply just divide the investment by the annual cash flows that can be generated, and the number you get is the period that the payment can be number of period that the payment can be paid back. Okay, that's also a way of capital budgeting decisions. And NPV and IRR method sometimes disagrees when projects are mutually exclusive, which means you can't take both projects, you can only choose one of them. And when there's a conflict between NPV and IRR, always use the NPV conclusion, right? Because maximizing shareholder wealth is the goal of the firm. So for capital budgeting, an important component is that we need to estimate future cash flows. And for each specific investment projects, such as, you know, I was thinking of getting a new iPhone, what's the next one? iPhone 9 maybe. So iPhone 9 will be a new project, and that's going to incur a lot of cash flows. And what's important to us is that we're going to use only the incremental cash flows. So iPhone 9 projects, we're going to share cash flow from many other projects that's existing, right? And those cash flows shouldn't be considered in our cash flows. Only the incremental, the additional cash flow, that should be measured and entered into our formula. Last, risk analysis about the project, specific to this project. It can be used to adjust the cost of capital of the firm. So WACC can be adjusted to suit this project specifically. Okay. Right. Okay, with knowledge we've gained, tools that we've learned, we are able to perform a valuation of a corporation based on financial forecasting. Okay, so when we are looking at financial statements, you'll be able to forecast them based on the percentage of sale method. Okay, and the simple job is just you forecast the sales for a couple years, and the rest of the income statement will be populated based on the current percent of sales of each of the items. Okay, and the exception here is the interest will be based on total debt from the balance sheet. And okay, and then we get net income for each of the years. Subtract dividend, we get retained earnings. Okay, so that is gonna enter into the balance sheet. Okay, retained earnings changes your balance sheet. And then you can forecast your balance sheet as well, simply based on the percent of sales method. Okay, from then you'll be able to estimate additional funds needed, and then free cash flows. That would be an important input for you to perform the valuation. Okay, so what models we can use? Total corporate value is equal to the value of operation plus any non-operating assets. Okay, so two components. One component comes from operation that has all those futures, right? Future free cash flow and discounting everything back. And the non-operating assets, since they're not using to produce anything in operation, and they're valued as of its market value today. Okay, so there's no discount needed, just getting a market value of it. So value of operation we can get is from the present value of future free cash flows. Okay. And then, you know, we get a value of this corporation, but most investors are interested in the value of equity. So how much is my stock worth, right? You can use corporate value, subtract that, subtract preferred stock, and all that's left is value of equity. So how do you get it for per share? Divided by the number of shares outstanding. And this gives you like a benchmark for the stock value in your hand. Okay. And well, we have valued the corporation and valued its stocks. And now what we need is there's another set of financial securities. They're called financial options. Okay, these are derivatives. Those values of options are derived from an underlying asset. Typically, it's a stock. Okay, so options can be calls or puts. And call option gives its holder the right but not obligation to buy an asset at a predetermined price within a specified period of time. Okay, so what it says is that, you know, if you buy and hold this option within a specific amount of time, you can track the underlying asset, maybe a stock. If the stock price exceeds the predetermined price, which is called strike price, X, the stock price is beyond that, you can buy the stock at the strike price. Okay? But you don't have to do it. When do you want to do it? When the stock price is higher than the strike price. That means you can buy the stock at the strike price, at the lower strike price, and you can easily, quickly sell it in the market at the higher stock price. The difference between the two prices will be your payoff. And then, well, you make quick money on that. Well, there are cases that the stock price ends up below the strike price. Now, I wouldn't want to buy at strike, so I won't exercise this option. And then I get a zero payoff, right? But what's nice is that I don't have to buy it. So when the market turns unfavorable for me, I don't lose. So the option itself is kind of a protection, and it serves as an insurance of investing in a stock. So when market is good, you can make money on that. When the market is bad, you don't lose. And then insurance, of course, comes with a premium, right? you always pay a premium on an insurance. And the premium of an option is called premium of an option, right? Price of an option. Okay, so that's a call option. And of course, the put option serves as an opposite. So it gives the holder the right, but not obligation, to sell an asset at same predetermined price with specified period of time. Okay, so the only difference here is buy or sell. So now, when the market price is higher than strike, what do you want to do? Now I'm selling, right? Would I want to sell at a strike price that is lower than market? No, right? Why would I want to sell a lower price when I can sell in the market? Okay, so I am not going to exercise, and my payoff is 0. Well, in another case, when the market price is lower than strike, I can exercise the option and sell it at a higher strike price. I can purchase the same stocks in the market with the stock price in the market. So the difference of X minus S is your payoff. Okay, so remember the payoff when the variable call price is this. Okay, so payoffs, and you're not exercising in the middle ones. Okay, so okay, these are those are the methods. That's how you can determine whether to exercise options based on the market conditions. And we have some terminology. First, strike price is usually denoted as an X. And next, in the money and out of the money. So it's called moneyness. Interesting word. Moneyness. When are you in the money? Is when immediate exercising is valuable. So when X is greater than S for calls, and when S is lower than X for calls. Okay, and when immediate exercising is not favorable for you, that means you're out of the money. So for call, it's when market is lower than strike, you're not exercise. And for put, as stock is higher than strike, and it's for out of the money for put. And add money, that will be same for both of them. The strike and stock price are the same, which means you're indifferent in terms of exercising the option or let it expire. Okay, exercise value is often what we call intrinsic value. Okay, and it's determined by finding out the payoff of immediate exercise. Okay, if you are in the money, it will be your payoff. If you're out of the money, it will be 0. Out of money or at the money, it will be 0. Okay, so for call, it's going to be stock minus strike, or 0, whichever is higher. So when stock is actually lower than strike, the second item is below 0 and will not exercise. That means the intrinsic value of this call is 0. And for put, you can do the same thing, right? Max of 0 and strike minus stock. Okay. When market is favorable, that means X is higher than S. You have a positive value. And when market is not favorable, you have a negative value here, so your intrinsic value will be 0. Okay. And in sum, intrinsic value should never be below 0. And another component of option value is called time value. And time value cannot be easily measured. But what we can do is we use the option price, subtract the exercise value, which is the intrinsic value, and the rest of it, option subtract exercise value, we can deduct time value of this option. Okay, so there's some basic concepts of financial options. And then next, let's look at what a few determinants of value of a call option. Okay. So first is similar to stock price. Either P or S can serve as a stock price. The value of a call will be higher for a higher stock price, right? That means it's more likely you're gonna profit from exercising this option. Okay. In strike price, well, what do you think? Of course, we want it to be as low as possible. So value of call is lower for a higher strike price. Okay, when it's when the exercise price is high, it's less likely for the market price to go beyond this level of exercise price. And it's less likely for you to make a profit from exercising the option. Okay. And time period. Well, the longer the time period, the higher the time value. Okay. And the intuition is, the longer the time, there's more likely you can see a higher P, right? So we might wait a longer time and there be a higher market price to beat the exercise price. Okay, and time value increases the option value as well. And the next one, standard deviation of the underlying stock returns. Okay, so riskiness of the stock. What do you think? If the stock is risky, that means, it's going to be varies from a mean. So it can jump around with a larger distance from the mean. And what matters here is that, well, it would be easier for the stock price to beat strike price, since the stock price can go more likely go into a extreme value. Alright, so the value of call option is higher for a greater standard deviation. Last one is the risk-free interest rate. So how does that affect it? Okay, value of call option will be higher for greater risk-free rate, right? So when you think about it, risk-free rate serves kind of a discount rate or interest rate. So the future value of stock price can be greater because the stock price is going to grow faster from this rate, a higher rate. Okay. So these are the determining factors of option values. And well, this concludes the chapter 1 through 13 review. And now you can start working on the assignment 1 to practice the techniques that we have learned, and to see if if you mastered the fundamental tools that we need for FIN601. Okay, in the exercises you have 3 attempts, and each of the attempts you have 3 opportunities for check my work. And after the first check my work, Well, hint will be provided when there's one. And then for each of the problem, an ebook chapter, chapter component, related chapter component in ebook button is provided, so you can go back and read the chapter, look at examples in the course to help you solve that problem. Okay, and it's not timed, so you have unlimited time, and I would advise you to start as early as possible, since you might need to read more to refresh your memory and to practice with exercises in the textbook. Okay, good luck for the assignment, and if you have questions, well, your first resort your first resort is the discussion board, and then if you find if it's not appropriate for the discussion board, shoot me an email. I'm happy to solve the problem for you. Okay, and alright, this is it, and there's no quiz for this review, and then you should be starting to read chapter 14, and then I will assign chapter 14 assignments and quizzes in the next week. Alright.